it has all truly led up to this.
We have a wonderful evening's entertainment lined up for you.
23.
Hey, what's up you guys? This is Steffi, aka My Humble Opinion, and welcome back to another IMHO Film Club movie review. So today on my channel, I am finally reviewing the highly anticipated documentary, at least, again, highly anticipated on my channel, the highly anticipated documentary entitled Whitney. Whitney, of course, was directed by Kevin Macdonald, and if it wasn't self-explanatory enough, this documentary is really about the life and times of Whitney Houston. You really cover her entire life from her birth to her death and everything that happens in between. So it is important to note before we get into things that this documentary is actually, I believe, the first authorized Whitney Houston documentary by her estate. So you get a chance to hear from the people in her life and you have access to never before seen footage and her music. I was really excited to go see this movie. In fact, I was so excited that I made 3 different reaction and review videos for this movie. I reacted and reviewed the US teaser trailer, the European teaser trailer, and then the US official trailer. And because of those videos, the people involved with the Whitney movie actually contacted me and they sent me some gifts, like a little swag to celebrate the release of this movie. And you know, the shirt that I'm wearing and also the poster that's back here were gifts from the people involved with the movie. So once again, I just have to give them a quick shout out and say thank you so much. In fact, I've already seen it 3 times and I'm filming this on a Wednesday. Needless to say, I really enjoyed this movie. And for those of you guys already being like, oh no, these people, they sent her stuff, her review is gonna be so biased, it won't be, I promise you. I have some issues with this movie as well, so we're gonna get into that. So as with every movie review on this channel, I'm gonna talk about the pros and then the cons, and then I'm gonna give my final grade, my final movie ratings. So let's just get into this.
I love you, Whitney.
She was beautiful.
I'm singing music from my heart.
Hot.
If I don't have you.
Alright, so before I begin, really quickly, I just want to say, surprisingly, there are spoilers for this movie, so if you want to go in cold and you don't really want to know much about this documentary going in, don't watch the rest of this video, but I will say I highly recommend that you see it in theaters. This is your warning. Go, leave now. Okay, so my first pro to this movie is it's just a really well made movie. I think Kevin Macdonald did a really great job with directing. The interviews that Kevin Macdonald conducted, I think he was able to get some really great responses from a wide variety of people. In fact, I've heard that he interviewed over 70-ish people, but he only kept about 30 of the interviews, so like he was very thorough, and the answers that he did get from the people that he kept were very insightful and very telling. And even the people who didn't talk that much or didn't want to speak much about what they were asked, Bobbi Brown, that was telling in and of itself. Aside from the interviews, there's a wide variety of footage from like never before seen video clips from different eras throughout Whitney's life. And like for me, I was really impressed with the photos and the news clippings and the posters that were part of very distinct eras in Whitney's life. And they were like headline news clippings that kind of made me like literally gasp out loud in the theater. The first one was this poster of Whitney among like other celebrities, and the caption under her picture was absolutely queer. I was like, holy God, I can't believe that was a thing. The second thing that literally made me audibly gasp in the theater was the magazine article that was about how John Huston, Whitney's father, basically hired an outside person to try and break Robin Crawford's legs for like $6,000. What? Alright, my second pro is kind of along the lines of a well-made movie. I just really wanted to talk about the editing, specifically the fact that Kevin Macdonald was able to place Whitney Houston's life within this long cultural timeline. And I just think that's honestly so important when telling a person's story, because ultimately a person's life story may be a response to what is culturally happening around them during that period of time. And it either may perfectly reflect the time or it's going to go against what is happening during said time. Like the whole 80s montage, seeing Whitney's rise to stardom, and then also seeing little different clips of what was happening during the 80s. Like Reagan was in office, and the different artists of the 80s, like Michael and Madonna, and seeing a little clip of Princess Diana during the 80s. That all reflects a very optimistic, bright, colorful, happy-go-lucky period in history, and that's just reflected in her life as well. And then in the 90s, we get to like a darker period. I like to call the 90s montage My Life is Falling Apart, because in that 90s montage, they're kind of trying to show that Whitney's life is really just like taking a tumble and it's getting out of hand and things are becoming very, very chaotic. And that's really reflective in that montage because, you know, they show OJ in trial, they show a little clip of Princess Diana's funeral, they show this random lady like drowning in a car, and then they show like fire. It's just like, wow, this is kind of scary. So yeah, I just thought those two editing montages in terms of placing Whitney within the pop culture world history timeline was just so well done. Alright, my third pro to this movie is that you really learn a lot about the family. Learning about where Whitney came from and who her family was is such an important part of her life story specifically, because that really affects who she becomes in her adult life, like both professionally and personally. I loved getting to learn more about the brothers. I don't think we've ever really gotten a sense of who the brothers were aside from the fact of they're Whitney Houston's brothers. Like, you really get a sense of who they are as individuals and how they functioned in Whitney's life. And honestly, learning about the brothers just made me realize that her eventually getting with Bobby Brown makes a lot of sense, because, and they even say this in the documentary, Bobby Brown was really a combination of her two brothers. So it makes sense that she would want to be with someone like Bobby Brown because that's who she grew up with and she's used to that. Also, getting to learn about her father, I was just like, wow, he's not a great guy. You really learn about the shady business dealings that he was doing even before Whitney became Whitney Houston, and then you also learn about the shady dealings he did when he started managing Whitney Houston, and you're just like, oh my god, this is insane. And then of course, getting to Sissy's narrative in this documentary, I really feel like in a way, it was a really great redemptive narrative. In this movie, you learn about how Sissy really helped shape Whitney's sound, and she really cultivated Whitney's talent. She really took her time in making sure Whitney's talent grew under the radar so that when she did finally get out there, she was ready for it. There's this really great moment in the documentary where they show Clive Davis and Whitney Houston. Clive Davis, of course, is known for really helping Whitney in her career. And they show Clive and Whitney like sitting on the couch and they're together, but then when they start talking about how, yes, Clive Davis was the person who packaged it all together, but the person responsible for cultivating that talent and shaping Whitney's sound was Sissy. And they do this really great moment of, you see a close-up of Clive and Whitney, and then it starts to pull back, revealing Sissy and Clive and Whitney. And it's like, oh, that simple move was such a great and effective way of emphasizing that point. My fourth pro to this movie is the plight of Bobbi Kristina. In this documentary as well, you really get a sense of who Whitney was as a parent. Those moments were really tough to watch, especially as a Whitney fan. They show different clips of Bobbi Kristina when she's really little, and she looks visibly scared. Like, I've never seen this footage before, and she looks terrified. Like, at one point, they literally show Bobbi Kristina, and she's like in like a little corner, like hunched, and she's like grabbing her legs, and she just looks really scared. So I felt really bad for her, and you hear different stories from different people about how like Bobbi and Whitney just were not the greatest parents, and they were pretty neglectful considering all the chaos that was surrounding their life. And it's not that you start hating them, it's just you feel bad for Bobbi Kristina because you really learn that she had no chance from the get-go, and that's kind of the saddest part in all of this. They do make it a point to say that Whitney, she didn't start off as a bad parent. She tried her best, I believe, to try and juggle her career and her life as a mom. And I think, you know, one of my favorite parts in this movie is when they show this moment of Whitney backstage and she's like getting her hair and makeup done, and you hear the crowd in the background, and there's Bobbi Kristina in that room with her, and she turns to Bobbi Kristina and she's like, "You're the best kid in the world, I love you so much, give me a hug." And then Bobbi Kristina gives her a hug, and then Bobbi Kristina runs away, and Whitney like looks at herself back in the mirror, she's getting her hair done, and she's like, "Oh, thank you God, thank you Jesus so much." And you're just like, oh, those are the moments that like my heart feels for Bobbi Kristina, and it feels for Whitney, because in that moment, like, you could really tell she really loved her daughter. It's just, there was just so much going on, and you know, it's just sad. My fifth pro to this movie is I gained a whole new appreciation and perspective on milestone professional moments in her career. Namely, two moments. The first was the Star-Spangled Banner. I didn't know the story of the Star-Spangled Banner in terms of them changing the time from a 3/4 time to a 4/4 time, and that being very in the root of the gospel genre. And the fact that the take that we all have grown to love and appreciate was her first take of the song. That's insane. But more importantly, the cultural significance of an African American woman during that period of time singing the national anthem in such an emotional, stirring way that evoked a sense of freedom, and how that was very significant because of who she was. I was like, wow, I would have never thought to look at that moment in that way. Another moment was the bodyguard moment in the movie. The way Kevin Costner describes how Whitney Houston, as an African American woman, ran down those stairs, the same stairs that different white women in the history of Hollywood films have done, and the way she like kissed him as an African American woman, the way that so many white women have done before her. I never thought to look at it that way. I was just like, oh wow, that is really important. And then also the cultural significance of the bodyguard moment from a global perspective, and how she was the first person to perform in a newly desegregated South Africa. That part gives me chills. Like I think about that moment in the documentary, I'm like, wow, that is so important. Like I can't imagine what it must have felt like seeing Whitney Houston in South Africa, and what those songs must mean to you, especially as a person of color in South Africa. Like that's real, that's amazing. And those were some of my favorite parts of the movie as well, because you really get a sense of her cultural impact and the legacy that her music has beyond just chart statistics. My sixth pro to this movie is the book ending in terms of the thematic use of home. They begin this documentary essentially in Jersey, where Whitney was born. Within the first 30 minutes or so of the movie, they show Whitney's first televised performance on the Merv Griffin show when she performs home. That moment is just so emotional because, you know, she's just so young and there's just so much great things ahead of her. And of course, they end this movie again revisiting that same performance, and then as you're hearing that song performed, you're seeing clips of Whitney's body being flown back to New Jersey and the funeral and all of that stuff. And it's just, I truly will never listen to her live rendition of Home the same way ever again. Like, I'm pretty sure if you were to play it right now, I would start crying. I just love, from a narrative perspective, the fact that they were able to like literally bookend her story from home to home, you know? And then also from a narrative perspective too, if we want to keep going with that idea, they kind of make different points throughout the movie. The fact that people felt like Whitney never really knew herself, therefore she never really was at home with herself. And then there's a line that someone says, I forget who says it, but the line is, to me, she was just a little girl always trying to find her way back home. And they even play that at the end of, I believe, the official American trailer. Just the whole theme of home is ever present throughout this entire thing. Whew, God. All right, and to the cons. The first con that I have for this movie is in terms of editing. I know I like went on and on and on about how I love the editing of this movie, but when he was conducting the interviews, there were lots of jump cuts throughout those interview moments. When he would do those jump cuts, it felt like I was watching a YouTube video. It didn't feel right, especially since this is like a really well-made documentary. I was like, oh, why are you doing the jump cuts? Like, I understand, like, I'm sure those people probably had like long moments of pause and whatnot, but I was just like, ooh, there's too much of that. My second con, and this is like a really, really big con, and I think this arguably might be my biggest con to this movie, is I wish we got more of a sense of Whitney the artist. I wish we got to hear more of her music, for sure, especially since this is an authorized documentary and therefore you have access to different footage and you have access to the music. Like, I wish we would have heard more of the music. The first time I got done watching this documentary, they showed this end title card and it's like, Whitney still holds the record for most #1 consecutive hits. Like, I believe it's like 7 consecutive #1 hits. There's another sentence that's like, I Will Always Love You is still the biggest selling single by a female artist of all time. Honestly, if I did not know anything about Whitney Houston and I had just finished watching that documentary, I would have been like, huh? What? How? When did she have time to do all of that? For me, especially as a Whitney fan, and I'm sure this is like very true for a lot of us Whitney fans, going into this documentary, we were really excited to see more of the never before seen footage. Potentially her in the recording studio, her rehearsing, her, I don't know, just working professionally, and we didn't really get that much of it. Like, I think we pretty much saw all of those moments from the trailer, and I'm not gonna lie, I was a little disappointed with that. There was that one moment though when they showed Whitney on stage and she was rehearsing her backup singers and she was like vocally arranging them. She was like, yes, more. Like, I literally was pointing and waving my hands at the theater during that moment, being like, this is what we want to see. We need more of this. And it's like, it's so important because Whitney's legacy, especially her legacy as an artist, has been so tarnished because of all the personal chaos that surrounded her life towards the end. People, and I still think this is very, very true, people discredit her and they tend to forget how amazingly gifted and what a vocal genius she was. In fact, you know what? When I was getting ready to do this video, I was watching different Whitney Houston movie reviews, and this guy right here, I'm gonna leave his comment on the screen. This guy has been leaving comments on several of those Whitney movie reviews, and this is the reason why we need to start talking more about the musical genius and craftsmanship behind Whitney. There's this one very poignant line in the documentary. I think it's one of her family friends says that Whitney was groomed to make legacy music. And I feel like from that statement alone, there was such a missed opportunity to really explore the ways in which she ended up fulfilling that prophecy and creating legacy music. Like, that would have been a great way into the creative process of The Bodyguard, because I don't care what anyone says, Whitney Houston songs on the Bodyguard soundtrack are legacy music, all of them. And when talking about the songs from the Bodyguard, you could have had this whole moment talking about how I Will Always Love You is a cover song originally done by Dolly Parton, but there's a reason why. Granted, a lot of Whitney's songs are cover songs, but there's a reason why those songs became hits when Whitney covered them. And it's because of the way she sang those songs and how she interpreted those lyrics and how she vocally arranged herself. Like, that is the genius of Whitney Houston, and that should have been explored in a documentary about her. Or you could have also delved into how the record sounds so different compared to when she sings those same songs live, and you could have cut back and forth between the record and her singing those songs live, and how experiencing Whitney Houston live is just otherworldly. And they do get a little bit into it, but they could have done it so much more. Additionally, that moment when she gets booed at the Soul Train Awards, they talk about that in this documentary, but they more so talk about how from that point when she's booed at the Soul Train Awards, just so happens to be the same night she meets Bobby Brown, and they kind of take that event and how it affects her personally. That event also affected her sound professionally, and they could have explored her I'm Your Baby Tonight era album. And I'm not just saying that because that's my favorite album, but like listening to her two previous albums and then I'm Your Baby Tonight onward, it's very clear that she's trying to make her sound quote unquote more urban or like more black. So I don't know, there was just like so many different ways they could have weaved in her music, and they just didn't. Alright, my third con of this movie, and this is coming from a very big Whitney fan, like I'm pretty sure only the Whitney fans would know this, is there were definitely some stuff that they just quite frankly glossed over. I have a list here. Like I said earlier, the decision to make her music more black sounding, it would have been nice to have that explored. The whole story of how Sissy, during Whitney's first televised performance when she sings Home, Sissy literally starts conducting the band. I mean, in this documentary you have this whole narrative about how Sissy was so instrumental in shaping Whitney's sound, and there you have a story where she is literally shaping Whitney's sound. Like, that could have and should have been part of this documentary. The fact that Whitney Houston also had multiple miscarriages, it's really surprising how that particular moment in her life just continually gets glossed over. I mean, then again, maybe that's just because like in this grand scheme of things, like that is just so minor compared to all the other things that happen. Whew, that says a lot, but why didn't we get to hear more about that? I think it would have been really interesting too to explore how the movie persona she was trying to create for herself on screen, like with her roles in movies like The Preacher's Wife or even the Cinderella movie with Brandy, was to a certain extent very opposite with what was going on with her in her personal life. I'm really surprised that they didn't include clips from her Oprah Winfrey interview, because she's very, very candid in that interview. At least to me she is. And in that interview, she famously talks about how she was hitting the drugs like every day when she was filming The Preacher's Wife. And then she also talks about how in their home in Atlanta, like she would find eyes on the walls and eyes in the closet that Bobbi Brown had drawn. And they talk about this in the documentary, but you don't hear it from Whitney herself. So I was really surprised that they didn't include that footage during that point in the documentary. And then there's another interview where she has this line about how like success doesn't chain you, fame does. That would have been great to include in this documentary. So again, I think I'm being very, very nitpicky as a Whitney fan, and I think only the Whitney fans would even know that that stuff is missing. But they are important topics to be explored within her life that were definitely missed. My fourth con to this movie, and you know, it greatly ties in with my two earlier points, is I'm not quite sure if the film medium was appropriate for Whitney's life story. I know like recently there's been lots of very successful multiple-part docu-series about a certain subject. Like namely, I'm thinking about the O.J. Simpson docu-series that I believe aired on ESPN. I think it was called O.J. Made in America. And O.J. Made in America, that was like a 5-part docu-series that aired on TV. Another person that recently has a multiple-part docu-series is Bobby Kennedy on Netflix. I believe that's like 3 or 4 episodes long. My friend was telling me like that's really, really great too. I think honestly, they could have taken that same exact approach with Whitney's story. I saw this movie with 3 of my friends who aren't very familiar with Whitney, and one of them was just like, oh my god, like her life story literally has everything. The documentary in and of itself is already long. It's 2 freaking hours. As a Whitney fan, I was like, yes, girl, like I could sit there, make it 5. But to the average person, that's probably very, very long. So what I'm saying is, I just feel like maybe they should have told her story in the docu-series multiple-part format. And I was actually watching an interview with Kevin Macdonald. I don't want to speak for him, but I get the sense that if it were up to him, he would have had it that way as well. Because by being confined to the film format, where if you're pushing over an hour and a half, that's already long, you have to skim the surface on a lot of different things, and you don't get to delve as deeply as you want to. So you can also make the argument right now too, I don't know like what is happening in the month of July, but there just so happens to be a lot of really great documentaries out aside from the Whitney doc. Like you have the Won't You Be My Neighbor documentary about Mr. Rogers. There's this Ruth Bader Ginsburg documentary called RBG. There's also that documentary about the 3 identical triplets. I don't know. Like there's just a lot of documentaries out right now, but in the case of Whitney, while she is in great company at the theaters, I just feel like her story would have benefited from being told in a multiple docu-series format because there's just so much going on. Alright, so my rating for this movie, I'm gonna walk you through it. So after I finished watching the documentary, my first viewing on Thursday, I originally was gonna give this a B+. And then I watched it with my mom. Whitney Houston is her girl, like she loves Whitney. And after watching it a second time with her, I was like, okay, strong B+, like I'm pretty sure of that. And then I watched it with 3 of my friends who really don't know much about Whitney. Talking to them after watching the movie, and even while watching the movie with them, just literally seeing their jaws drop and them like audibly gasp, I think I grew to appreciate the movie more for what it was versus what it should have been and what it wasn't. Because of that experience I had, I'm gonna give this movie a solid A-. Granted, for sure, while I definitely felt there was some stuff missing in her personal life, and while I wished we could have seen more of the musical genius that was Whitney Houston and her legacy, I just felt like the story that they managed to tell within the 2 hours that they had was just so well done, and it was so compelling, and they did manage to get through a lot within that 2 hours. After reflecting, it's really important to understand, like, I am watching this from the perspective of someone who was like a huge diehard Whitney Houston fan. I don't know if there will ever be anything made that will like satisfy my needs when it comes to a Whitney documentary. But to people within my own generation who maybe aren't too familiar with Whitney's story, or even to other people who grew up with Whitney but yet at the same time they just didn't quite understand why she was making the choices that she was making, this documentary really does a great job with telling her story. And you know, when all is said and done, the thing that really makes this Whitney documentary different from all of the other Whitney documentaries is that whereas those Whitney Houston documentaries, you sympathize for her, in this documentary, you not only sympathize for her, but you empathize with her. Sympathizing for someone, at least my interpretation of that, means you feel sorry for them, but empathizing is when you feel like you're in it with them. And because of the way that they told this story and because of the editing, you really feel like you're experiencing everything that is happening to Whitney Houston throughout the progression of this documentary. There's this one line that one of the A&R people that she was with in the 2000s says. Whitney told him, "I feel like I only slept 45 minutes throughout this entire summer." And that's really how I felt coming out of this documentary. I was like literally overwhelmed. You really feel like you're experiencing everything with Whitney, and you really feel like you're on this journey with her, which is why when you get to the end of the movie, when you see her body being flown back to New Jersey and you hear home once again, it's so emotional because you're like, wow, she lived a life. Like, that is a life with the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. Oh, I could just go on and on and on. But yeah, as a whole, I'm gonna give this movie an A-. I really, really enjoyed it. I keep wanting to see it over and over and over again. And I think it's a movie where the more I see it, the more I appreciate the movie for what it is. So good job, Kevin Macdonald. Good job to all of the people involved with this documentary. Like, you had quite the task in telling her story within a 2-hour time frame. I mean, sure, you could have gone over 2 hours, but it's a movie. Again, should have been a docu-series, but you guys did a really, really great job. And also, you know, a lot of people always say whenever they see that the Houston family is involved with a Whitney related project, they're instantly like, no, I don't want to buy it, or no, I don't want to see it, or I don't want to listen to it because they're gonna, you know, they're gonna benefit off of it. I want to just say really quickly, and I'm not meaning to like kiss butt here, thank you for being so honest and open as you were ready and willing to be. Oh man, what a documentary. I don't know how long, honestly, this movie review is gonna be. I've literally been talking for an hour, and this was my 4th attempt at trying to keep it to 15 to 20 minutes. So whatever you're watching, hopefully it's not too long. I hope I did it for you, and I hope if anything, this convinced you to go see the Whitney documentary. Okay, I'm gonna end it right there. If you like this video, please give this video a thumbs up. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and please turn on the notification button down below so you know when a new video from me comes out. Also, believe it or not, I want to open the discussion up to you guys aside from the comment section. I feel like there's a lot that I didn't get to talk about that I wanted to talk about, and because of that, I am actually going to be doing a live stream this Sunday, a strictly Whitney Houston live stream where I get to talk to you guys about the movie in real time, so we could make this as interactive as possible and we could just talk about all things Whitney Houston. I'm gonna be doing that live stream this Sunday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. July 15th, make sure you come back to my channel at around that time and you'll see it happening. If you know other Whitney Houston fans that want to join in on the live stream as well, share them the link to my channel so they could see that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm interested to hear what you guys thought about the movie in the comment section below, and hopefully you can join in on the stream this Sunday. With all of that being said, as always, everything I said was just my own personal thoughts and all in my humble opinion. Great job, people working on the documentary. Rest in peace, Whitney Houston. Rest in peace, Bobbi, Kristina. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.
When I think home, I think of a place where there's love overflowing. I wish I